An episode of this One Time in Kankakee from the WVLI Podcast Network will start right after this. Listen to all of today's local news in one place.
Checking your WVLI news, I'm Rob West.
The WVLI News Update brings you the day's news in 10 minutes or less. Clear, credible, and on your schedule. Follow now wherever you get your podcasts or at WVLI927.com and click on air. It's all part of the new WVLI Podcast Network. The voices you trust beyond the dial. This One Time in Kankakee, we counted down the 3 most listened to episodes of 2025. Welcome back to This One Time in Kankakee on the WVLI Podcast Network. I'm Jake LaMore. Now, we launched this podcast back in October with a simple idea. Everyone in Kankakee County has a story. Maybe it's weird, maybe it's funny, maybe it's a little heartbreaking, but it's ours. And since then, we've covered a lot of ground. And since we're sitting here between those awkward, quiet days between Christmas and New Year's, I thought we'd look at the receipts. I pulled the download numbers to see which stories you shared and listened to the most this year. So we're counting down the top 3 most listened to episodes of 2025. And the results of the math were pretty interesting, I thought. We actually had a tie for the number 3 spot. And honestly, I really love this tie because it just really showcases the absolute range of the different types of stories that we share on this One Time in Kankakee. So tied for the bronze medal, we have episode 4, Jennifer Hudson Came to See Our Musical, and episode 2, A Bank Robber Called Me. On one hand, you have episode 4, where we talked about the time an EGOT winner, Jennifer Hudson, quietly slipped into a seat at a local musical. The directors Andrew McBurnie and his father Matt McBurnie, they knew she was coming, but the cast, they had to figure it out in the middle of a song. The show began. It was still daylight. The cast was on stage running through the opening numbers. And then Andrew saw them.
We see this group of people walk from the side and kind of set up their chairs further to the back. There's about 4 or 5 of them. And I knew who it was. It was J Hud, and she had a whole posse. And Jennifer had, it wasn't a hat, but she had something on her head. She had sunglasses on. Like she was in a bit of a disguise. She didn't dress like she was Jennifer Hudson, A-list celebrity. She was very much keeping it on the down low.
But you can't really hide a presence like that. And on stage, under the hot lights, the performers started to notice.
And what was so fun was watching the cast slowly figure out what was going on. Because they have to keep singing and dancing. And in Godspell, unlike many other shows, the full cast is on stage the entire time. They do not go off stage until the end of Act 1 and the end of Act 2. They're on stage the entire time. So there's no time to go freak out for a minute. But one by one, we could tell the cast members were like, that is Jennifer Hudson out there watching us right now. And I could see it on their face. It was very funny and very exciting.
Can you imagine trying to hit a high note while realizing an Oscar winner is watching you from the back row? It's kind of terrifying and a lot of pressure. I'm anxious just thinking about it. But tied with that brush of fame is episode 2, and it's on the complete opposite spectrum, much darker and a grittier reality. And this was the story of a time a bank robber made a phone call. Rob West, our news director, this takes place in the late 2000s. He was sitting at home when his cell phone rang, and he thought it was a prank. It turned out it wasn't.
I went home. It was about noon. I was watching a little bit of TV, and my cell phone rang. And I answered it. This is Rob. And the guy on the other end said, "Hi, I'm the bank robber." And first of all, I figured it was one of my friends pulling a prank on me. And I said, okay. And so we talked for a little bit. And the more we talked, the more convinced I became that he was indeed the bank robber. And I said, okay. I said, first of all, how'd you get my number? And he said, well, I called the radio station. I told the lady at the front desk I had information about last night's bank robbery. She gave me your number. And that's fair enough. I mean, I'm the news director. Somebody calls and says they have information about a story. Fair enough. I said, okay. I said, what do you want from me? And he said, I want you to tell my story. He said, I've listened to you on the radio. He said, I know I can trust you. He said, I want you to tell my side of the story. He said, I told the girl I had a gun. He said, I didn't have a gun. I don't carry a gun. He said, I couldn't shoot anybody. He said, I wouldn't shoot anybody.
I just can't imagine what it was like being Rob at that moment in time, because I would have felt terrified and almost maybe wanted to laugh at the same time. As Rob said, he thought it was a prank. Now, if you haven't heard how that standoff ended and the police chase that followed after that, you need to go back and listen to episode 2. Moving on to the silver medal, this episode missed the top spot by just a hair. It seems you really love a little bit of historical rebellion, and I can't blame you, because this story is just so many emotions attached to this story. Coming in at number 2 is episode 5, The Village of Bonfield Banned Rhummy. Now, this story proved that small town politics have always been, I guess we'll just call it, passionate. If you haven't heard the full episode, you should go back and listen to how a card game tore apart a village, or I should say almost tore apart a village. Here's the moments where the gavel came down. Trouble began when a number of village housewives lodged a formal complaint with the town board. They claimed they were fast becoming Rhummy widows.
A Rhummy rebellion brewed in the sinless village of Bonfield last night.
That's from a United Press wire service story that ran on the front page of the Kankakee Republican News on January 27, 1938. The complaint from the housewives was all it took. The village leadership, led by Mayor Reuben Orwig and his 6 aldermen, decided to act. They believed these card games, as they put it, were giving the town a bad name. And so, they did what they did best. They made another law. The mayor and his board officially put Rhummy on the blue law list. At first, the players thought it was a joke. An ordinance against playing Rhummy for dimes? It seemed absurd, but village officials were deadly serious. Justice of the Peace Leslie Yates, the man tasked with enforcing the law, made the village's position crystal clear.
Anyone caught in the act of playing Rhummy will be fined $10 plus costs.
Now, before you laugh at a $10 fine, in 1938, that was the equivalent of over $200 today. So imagine paying $200 because you tried to play cards in a barn. Now, that's Bonfield justice back in the 1930s. One of our listeners actually made a comment about this episode that I thought was really cool that pertained to the justice of the peace in this episode, Leslie Yates. And this comment is from Sandy Dion. She said, Les Yates was my great uncle. I shared this with his granddaughters, and they said they knew that he was a justice of the peace, but they never heard about this. They just knew that he would marry people in his living room with his grandma as the witness. It's really cool to know that some of the Yates family is still alive and heard this episode, because as I was putting this episode together, that was one of the things that crossed my mind, was like, I wonder if any of the family members of the people that we're portraying in this episode, I wonder if they're still alive. So thanks for listening and sharing that with us, Sandy. And I want to give a shout out to all of my coworkers on the WVLI podcast network who participated in this episode and acted as the different characters who were actually real people in real life. And then last but not least, it was really bittersweet that this episode made it in the top 3 because it was primarily written and based off a blog post written by Jack Clacy from the Kankakee County Museum. That's where I got the idea of this episode because he wrote about this story in his weekly blog. And I thought this would make a great episode of This One Time in Kankakee. And he seemed to be okay with me using the story. And Jack, unfortunately, just passed away in 2025. So I think it's bittersweet that this episode was one of the most listened to episodes of the year. So rest in peace, Jack. We're going to miss your stories. And finally, the undisputed champion, the most downloaded, most shared, and probably the most laughed at episode of 2025. It wasn't a celebrity. It wasn't a law. It wasn't a heist. Coming in at number 1 is episode 3, I Kidnapped a Plaster Cow from Perry Farm Park. I think this one is number 1 because it's both completely absurd and moronic, really, but it's also hilarious at the same time because it's so unbelievable that this happened. So I'm really grateful to Shane Whitlock and his mom, Carrie, for stepping up to share this story with us.
I look over to the right, and there's this cow that seems to maybe naturally fit in this cart. So we decided to try it out.
There was just one problem. This was not a small statue.
The thing probably weighed, I feel like I'm not even exaggerating when I say this. I feel like it was at least 500 pounds. Me and my 2 friends, we tried to pick up the cow, and we weren't quite getting it up enough, but we were still kind of determined. And then lo and behold, one of our group friends just happens to be at Perry Farm at 9. No, it had to be after midnight, maybe 2 in the morning, maybe. It was late. So we called a friend over, and they, without hesitation, helped us lift the cow. And with that little extra bit of strength, we were able to get it up and onto the cart.
And just like that, they were off. Shane and his brother pushing a 500-pound plaster cow in a shopping cart through the quiet, dark streets of Bourbonnais.
And then we start getting a little bit paranoid because we hadn't seen a single cop or person in a while. And just as we were thinking that, there was a guy sitting in his shed, his garage, drinking, and he was just hooting and hollering at us, having the time of his life, just seeing this cow roll down the street.
Hooting and hollering. Now that drunk guy in the garage, he's the true unsung hero of this episode. I wish we could find that guy. By the way, the second half of that story involves a police officer knocking at the front door with that plaster cow in the living room while Shane's mom is trying to wake up to answer the door. It's pure chaos. You got to go listen to episode 3 immediately if you haven't. So those are the most listened to stories of our first few months in 2025. The cow, the cards, the star, and the robber. If you're new to the show, those are some really great places to start. You can go back, download the full episodes to hear how those stories end. And we have a massive slate of stories lined up for 2026, including this one dropping on Monday, January 12th.
This one time in Kankakee, my band turned an Aaron Carter concert into a TMZ headline. And he's like, yeah, you, get your out of here. And he's like, yeah, get out of here. Bye, Felipe. And then I'm just like, dude, eat a right? Hayes comes in. Troy Polamalu pushes this fool, tossed him probably 6-7 feet, Hayes was the only one to get punched throughout the whole altercation, which not a lot of people know.
you can hear the full true story of what really happened that night and clear up some rumors when that episode drops on Monday, January 12th. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for sharing these stories. And thank you for making This One Time in Kankakee a part of your life. If you have a memory that screams only in Kankakee, whether it's a celebrity encounter or just a really bad idea involving a shopping cart or maybe something else with wheels, you can email me at jake@milnermediapartners.com. I'm Jake LaMore. Happy New Year from all of us here on the WVLI Podcast Network.